I'm just going to start recording
Mhm.
because that's what we do these days.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to talk about?
Do you want to just jump in
Well, do you have anything you want to talk about?
before we talk about surfing?
Oh, so you want to talk about surfing?
Yeah, we're going to talk about surfing.
We're going
Did
to
you
talk.
watch the video I sent you?
Which one? The
The
Olympics?
surfing? Yeah.
I did.
Okay. Well, I was just thinking that we should have a conversation about surfing because, it's only been, I guess it's only been a sport in the Olympics, one Summer Olympics prior. And so I've never watched it, but I heard that it was on. And I thought, well, we talk about surfing all the time and you're a surfer and I know nothing about surfing. So why don't I just watch it and see, right?
Yeah.
And the second I turned it on, I was like, we need to talk about this. This is right. And so I guess I'll start just by describing. So I turned it on and immediately, first of all, there's no, it's just silent. The announcers, whereas the swim meets and the gymnastics, the announcers don't shut up. It was just silent. And you were just watching people kind of paddle out. The spectators were on boats and there were sort of lifeguards all around. They were saying that they were watching for the safety of the competitors, but they were also watching for the safety of the spectators because everybody's out in these waves and anything could happen at any moment. So that already to have to contend, all the other sports are in this very controlled environment, right? Like a swimming pool inside or a track meet or gymnastics floor, whatever. You just immediately, you're just watching these waves, right? And so, and they're talking about the wind and they're talking about this underwater, all these technical variables. And so it just immediately was wow, this is cool because you're contending with the world, right? So that was my initial. And then it was just insane. Then to watch them, ride the, what's it called? Barrel was just crazy. And so that's when I was okay, I need to talk to Rich because did he do this? This is crazy. And what did I say to you? I said, I don't think I understand what would inspire someone to have to go through that steep of a learning curve to do that, right? It just seemed crazy. And so that's where we opened the conversation and yeah.
Okay, so let's start to just unpack it a little bit. So, first of all, to call that surfing is that's not surfing. I mean, that's one tiny little aspect of surfing. That's the least surfing part of surfing that there is. First of all, you said it was a sport. Surfing's not a sport. You called them competitors. Surfing's not competitive. And not only that, you tuned into Ipu, okay, in Tahiti, French Polynesia. It's the Paris Olympics, so they're in Tahiti, which is an old French colony. So you've dropped in on it and so to call that surfing is just I don't know. That's so far from what I think of as surfing. That said, what you dropped in on was an absolute spectacle. It is so far out on the spectrum of surfing. So your question about what would compel somebody to get into that by looking at what you are looking at, the disconnect between how do you get to that and then what I talk about when I talk about surfing. To answer your question, no, I've never surfed like that. Have I been barreled? Kind of, yes. Have I been beyond where those guys are stoked to be barreled? Absolutely. Have I had the experience of being in the green room, tubed? Have I ever dialed a line on a glassy tube? Yeah. Do I know what that feels like? Yeah. But have I ever surfed? No. What they're doing is almost transhuman, what they're able to survive. I just tuned in and there was one scene where I saw the way that wave moves over that reef. In other words, the way that it sort of is this parabolic thing that curves in on itself, which is why it's so powerful, by the way that wave moves in over that reef, the way that it interacts. In other words, the relationship it has with the bottom, and the way it gets surged up, the way that it jacks up on the reef, and the way that when it goes parabolic like that and pitches that lip out, that is a very rare wave. Most waves are not like that. Most waves crumble and wall and do these things, but that wave it's a freak of nature. And so to be able to surf it and survive it, I saw one guy get hit with the lip. It's not even getting hit with the lip. It's getting, I don't know how they survive. I just don't. Your body must just be so tuned to punishment, that kind of punishment. And not only that, you must be so mentally accustomed to being just absolutely abused by the violence that I have felt in a wave, unspeakable violence. to where you're so disoriented that and you're forced into rocks and boulders and the things that you hear when you're down there, when you're on the bottom and you're being pinned and picked up and pinned again, and you've had to exhale everything, and then you're picked up and pinned again, and you're like, holy shit, how am I going to survive now, because I'm still being held down. And then you hear boulders like the size of cars being moved around you, like, and you're down there in the grinder. Anyway, so yeah, there are things that I've experienced, but never like that. So it's beyond me how those guys survive that stuff. However, anyway, so yeah, that's surfing in the way. But to think that that's like what I do, no. But what I fell in love with was a process of being lured in by the complexity of it all, and just hours sitting on a board staring at that blue horizon, and watching for the most subtle of cues while seaweed drifts by and while gulls fly through and salt in your mouth and sunburn and waiting and watching. And
this is where our conversation went, and this is when I was like, oh, we need to talk about this.
Yeah, it's that richness of experience in nature. That's really what surfing is for me.
Okay, but we're going to get back to that, but I first want to just emphasize my secondhand experience here, because I approached the conversation thinking like, oh, I watched surfing. This is surfing. And I was really hyper aware of how different already it was to the other sports. So like,
sure.
It had a vibe that, it was like my understanding of the surfing lifestyle, right? Like there was a relaxation to even the way that the announcers were speaking, to the waiting game of like watching the waves. Like it became almost more fun to like anticipate whether and try to guess if they were going to, what is it about the wave that makes them know that they might want to try it? And like things that like there were all these dynamics, relational dynamics that were happening that don't happen.
Well, and there's also things that are just outside of the control of what you can, there is no gymnasium.
Right. So, but like, this is a familiar experience when talking with you, in that I'm presenting something that I am comparing, these two things that I'm comparing. And then you actually literally said to me, you said, let's extend the spectrum a half a mile in the other direction even further. Right. So my experience of the Olympic surfing, I was comparing it to the very extreme, competitive, controlled environment. And I was saying like, well, it's super different. It feels really different. And that felt exciting. And then you said, yes, it is different. But guess what? That's actually not even the kind of surfing that I'm talking about when I talk about.
And this is the light years ahead conversation. Too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so you see how, in so many instances, so many contexts, we meet people who feel like the Olympic surfing is the furthest point you can go. And we're over here saying, no. Yeah. You can go deeper. You can get more grounded. You can get face plant yourself to the ground, because then, so you did that, you expanded that spectrum. And then I saw, like, I could really feel then how, like they are super bro-y, like they're a little like egoic. They want to kind of master the wave. Like there's still like an exploitative, competitive energy,
which is carryover from the other part of the spectrum.
Right. And so it's better. And so because it was better, it was really intriguing and exciting to me, and to see them contend with the earth, and the like drone shot, like you just get the,
and this is also a conversation about zone of proximal development, because if you can get to where you got to when you dropped in on the Olympic surfing, now you've entered a different zone of proximal development. Now let's start to talk about the real phenomenology of surfing.
And like it's also, when like when we talk about how like it's not a sacrifice once you understand. And so when I said like, why would anyone want to go on that learning curve? You were like, no, Rita, like you don't even understand that. That would be the sacrifice. But you're approaching it from a place where it's just like it's like a back door where it's not even a sacrifice. You don't even have to think about that.
I did talk about what it feels like to get pinned and to get, punished and abused and to feel like you might die and all that stuff. But the flip side of that is those moments of just ecstasy and pure ego dissolution. And there's that too, which is what keeps you coming back. It's those moments of bliss.
Right. And I saw it. Like, that's why I started finding myself more interested in watching them just laying on their boards on the waves, like waiting, because it was like, that's when I felt like they start like the dissolution. Like I could associate with that. Like I understand that, what it feels like to like lose yourself, sink your own intuition, so conform it, so precisely with the rest of the world that you move with it. And that's what I started watching them do. And then as soon as they chose to take the wave, they were like in like, let's master this thing mentality. And so that switch was really interesting.
Well, that thing though, but what they're doing, just from knowing the muscle memory of what they're doing, like when you paddle into a wave, it's really about timing. Everything becomes a sequence of events. It becomes a memory of, and you got to throw things a certain way, and everything's got to happen, and then you expect. The wave, that if you looked at how consistent that wave was, by the way, that wave breaks a certain way because it's on a reef. What they were doing was so far from like what an actual surf session is like. An actual surf session is you're jockeying with other surfers. There's all kinds of etiquette involved that you've got to take into account. The wave is constantly every wave is different. That wave, they're all pretty much the same. They're incredibly uniform. But when you go surfing out in your local break, on a beach break or whatever, where the sand is shifting, the wave comes in from a different angle and you've got set waves, you've got wind swell, you've got ground swell. When you start compounding all this complexity on top of it, it's especially like just even local etiquette. And just like when you get to know your local break too, like the way that like there's a big boulder down there and it's going to affect things in a way that that somebody who just came down from Nova Scotia is not going to know. And so you can kind of like surf around them and get positioned. Like there's all this stuff that happens. My point is that watching those guys surf, you're not going to get a lot of that. A lot of that stuff gets wiped clean. Like it's literally like they are on the cutting edge of like their performance envelope. And it's about timing. It's about getting everything timed just right, getting that edge to cut, to hold, and shoot for the you're going to get barreled because that's what that wave does. There's no, they're not turning. They're just going, they're dropping in and straight lining it for the, and they're doing sometimes they'll hold up. Like at one point, the guy kind of like hesitates and he kind of holds up, but there's no grace. There's no soul surfing at all. It's just boom, 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 it's different kind of surfing.
But I want to like bring us back to like why this to me is like such a valuable conversation, because we're creating a Venn diagram here. And so on one side is like very controlled, very competitive sports. In the middle, like what you just described, were the elements of control within this surfing. So again, when I was comparing it to the other Olympic sports, I was excited because I saw intuition. Like, I mean, there's intuition in the other sports too, but I saw this relationship with the world that I didn't see as much in the other sports. But what you're emphasizing, though, is like the competitive nature and the lack of variables. And even though there were more variables than in the other sports, there actually is a degree of control here because the wave is consistent relative to other surfing zones.
Well, and it just limits the amount of like artfulness of the way you can surf it.
And so like this is like when you see the thing that you can't see, like suddenly you extended that spectrum, right? So whereas to most people, surfing would have felt like it is extremely different from the other sports in the Olympics. There, in fact, is much more of that spectrum that we could go. And so for the last kind of bit of this, I want to like kind of take that part of the spectrum and sort of focus on it for a second. And can you describe for me, because you started talking to me about soul surfing, can you describe to me like what is soul surfing?
Well, that's just what happens when you come at it, from the beginning. When you see waves and you see pelicans surfing, you see pelicans fly. When you work your way into it through a gradual gradient of relationship, and it teaches you, and you form a deep relationship, which those guys have. They have to have paid their respects and paid their dues. They have to have spent time in order to do what they're doing. So I'm not discounting what they're doing. But what I'm saying is what's not visible in that, what you saw, is the years of time spent with waves in that environment, with boards, the hydrodynamics of a piece of foam or wood, just understanding how wave dynamics, and how all of that, like duck diving and just dealing with the spin cycle, getting caught inside, all these, getting deposited on a beach, getting caught in a rip, then learning how to use the rip, stuff like that becomes part of your sort of relationship with surfing. That's the soul surfing. And not only that, getting humiliated, understanding that you as a human animal are powerless against real waves. And to pretend otherwise is to forfeit life, your life, because you will lose until you learn. And this is amazing, because this is the lesson for humanity, is that once you switch your attitude from the machismo, you know what I mean? Even the guys who feign machismo, who pretend to be machismo, they have been denied. And then you can walk around like you're the man, but you know that you're not, that the wave is the man. But once you learn to work with nature, like once you learn how to duck dive, man, once you feel the power of the wave and you feel what it means to work with the wave, to actually use its power to go under it, and then you pop up the other side like, oh, wow. Like, boom. If humanity can do that, if humanity can do a fractal of that and suddenly realize that, oh, we're in this with nature, not against nature, we will become professional surfers. Anyway, that's kind of what soul surfing is when you fall in love with it, and then it falls in love with you. You're in a loving, you love it. It can still kill you, and it will, if you make a mistake, or you get ahead of yourself, or you get your cart before your horse. It's a good way to put it. Which is, if you have hubris, it will eventually correct that. That's the lesson. I mean, that's the Surfer's Guide to the Universe. And that lesson applies to every situation in life, including the one we're on as we try to navigate this space, the little corner, the people we meet, the art world, the art science thing. All of these situations have the exact same kind of like flavor, that if we can just learn to work with them and duck dive them, and we will get opportunities to get barreled if we do it right with ecological intelligence.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was like the last moment in the conversation that I was like, was so cool, because when you explained that to me, I suddenly went from not being able to fathom why anyone would want to do that to actually feeling like, oh, wait, I do that. Like, not surfing, but like,
Yeah.
I do that.
Yeah.
And so then it was like, oh, okay, I can completely see why someone would want.
And you've got deposited on the beach. You've got in the spin cycle.
Right.
You've been down there with the boulders, no breath left.
Right.
And you've also got barreled. You've dialed the line. You've done all those things.
Totally. And then we just started talking about all the fractals we always talk about with, and there's the like, how you gotta, we were talking the other day, you gotta loosen your knees. You have to stay kind of like loose, but that's back to the like, you got to be with the wave. You have to be with it's all about being with, and so it's all about the relationship. And then I start thinking about your Earth Story videos and the fractals and the no thing, and so it was just all too perfect of a conversation to not have. So that's why I wanted to.
Yeah, it's a good one, and I think we can have it again, and we can have it anytime, anywhere. Because it's not just surfing; it's everything's like this.
Yeah, I mean, didn't we spend like 20 minutes where you taught me how to duck dive over the phone, not because I was trying to surf, but because I was trying to surf? I mean, we use it all the time, so let's put it out there. Yeah, that's all.
Okay.